Hey guys, just a quick note before we get started here. This particular topic regarding mental health and public safety, we recorded almost 2 hours worth of content. And even in doing that, we barely even came close to scratching the surface of the amount of material that is out there over that area. But I do want to try to keep to my word to you guys and keep these episodes a little bit shorter so that they're easier to digest, a little easier for you guys to follow along and stay interested in. So in doing so, we've taken that nearly 2 hours worth of content and broken down into three separate parts. There are multiple segments to this topic. However, this particular segment in the very beginning of it is nearly 2 hours long. So we've broken that down so it's a little easier for you guys, doesn't take up so much of y'all's time. So with that being said, I hope you enjoy, and let's get into it. Thanks, guys.
Team 1, stand by. Copy. Team 1, standing by. Breach, breach, breach.
Hey, guys. Welcome back. I'm a little excited about today's episode. Not necessarily the content, but more rather the fact that when I started talking about or looking into doing an episode about this, there seemed to be a lot more interest in it. You know, there were several that wound up telling me, hey, when you get ready to do that one, let me know. I'd really like to look into that. So that makes it a little more exciting for me. I get a little more amped up for it whenever I know that there are people that are, interested in what I'm going to be talking about ahead of time. So what we're going to be talking about today is mental health in its relationship to public safety. So in public safety, we're talking about law enforcement, fire department, EMS, corrections, the public safety communication officers or dispatchers. So we're going to be talking about that. And I say mental health because there's a wide range of things that there's a wide range of things that goes into the mental health aspect of those that work in a job where you're essentially interacting with people on a daily basis, often enough on their worst days, on the individual's worst days. So as you all know, I am in public safety, and I've been in public safety for about 17 years now, a little over 17 years. And in that 17 years in public safety, I have seen a number of things, a lot of things that a lot of people in life are going to go through, and they'll never see those types of things. And, just like anywhere else, just like any other job, just like any other walk of life, those of us that work in public safety, we're no different than anyone else. We're humans. Our minds work similar. We have similar feelings and things like that. But we're exposed to things that other individuals usually don't get those opportunities. And in doing so, that runs our minds through a different gauntlet of things that most individuals aren't going to have to deal with. Now, they may have to deal with them on a certain level, depending on what they go through throughout their life, but it's that constant exposure to those things. It's that constant exposure to things that, really affects the public safety worker. It's, day in and day out, regardless of how their shifts are, they're constantly exposed to it. As far as law enforcement, they're constantly exposed to a variety of different things, whether it's car crashes, domestics, rapes, even traffic stops, mental health issues. I've talked before about how I've had to handle suicide calls or in general mental health calls where someone, is diagnosed or undiagnosed with some mental health disorder or mental health disease. And us in public safety are responsible for handling that situation. Fire department's no different. The fire department winds up working crashes, working fires, They go to a lot of medical calls, a lot of the calls where they're death scenes, they wind up going to that. So they've got a slew of things, just like in law enforcement, that they have to be immersed in and exposed to on a constant basis. EMS, no different. They can go from the simple call of someone who's had a persistent cough for 3 weeks and has decided not to go to their doctor's office, and instead decided to use EMS as their mobile doctor, all the way up to, a child death or a mass casualty incident. So they're constantly exposed to it as well. With corrections, I mean, you think about this, in corrections, these individuals are working in a facility where individuals, depending on the facility, have been found guilty of various crimes or waiting to stand trial for various crimes. And some of these individuals, I mean, think back to Charles Manson, the ice pick serial killer. A lot of these individuals, are housed in these facilities, and the folks in corrections are responsible for not only securing them and in accordance with whatever state of the justice system they're in, but they're responsible for essentially taking care of them on a day-to-day basis, making sure that they're staying alive, making sure they're fed, making sure they, are getting all their basic human rights. And it doesn't matter, as far as corrections goes, it doesn't matter what these individuals were adjudicated for. They're still responsible for them. It's a civil rights violation for these correction officers not to treat these other individuals who have been incarcerated as human beings. So they're constantly exposed to things, whether it's inmates fighting, whether it's, having to deal with someone who's, been found guilty or being convicted of being a serial killer, child rapist. All of these things, these individuals, these corrections officers, they know this and they're responsible for this. And inside of a prison system, it's a subculture in and of itself. Just like you have your circle of friends and the life you live, public safety has its own subculture. And by subculture, that just simply means that it's a way that individuals are and interact with one another and the world around them. And inside that subculture, there's other subcultures: law enforcement, fire, EMS, dispatch, corrections. All of those are even smaller subcultures within the subculture of public safety. So when you get to talking about those things, that's what I'm referring to by the subculture. Moving on to like dispatch, the public safety communication officers, whether it's 911, whether it's a local PD or sheriff's office or sheriff's department, dispatch. These men and women that work in this profession, while they may not be visually exposed to the same thing that the rest of us are, they're the ones that these calls usually come through first. They're the ones that, when you dial 911 or you call your local law enforcement or your local fire department or whatever the case may be, however it works in your particular area, when you call these individuals or these places, these individuals, these communication officers or dispatchers, they're the first ones that get it. So regardless of what's going on in life, when they answer that phone, they're immediately involved in whatever is going on, whether it's a active crime scene, whether it's an active shooter, whether it's someone who just woke up and found a loved one dead. It doesn't matter. When they get these phone calls often enough, again, like I said earlier, it's that person on the other end of the phone's worst day. It's their worst day. They get screamed at, cussed at. They listen to things that are hearing in the background. I know dispatchers that have literally been on the phone with someone and when they took their own life, whether it was by hanging, by a gun. They've been on the phone with individuals who called for medical attention and died while they were on the phone. The dispatcher's trying to get the information, the location and everything like that so they can send help to them. And they lose contact with them because the person falls out dead. And that, while it's not visually, in front of them, it is right at the forefront of their brain just because they're having to hear this and they're having to deal with it. They're having to go through all of their protocols and get everything done so that they can get that individual help or those individuals help. And it's taxing on their mind because they're experiencing this the same as we do, just in a different manner. And it causes mental health issues in that regard as well. Often enough, they want to be able to do more to help somebody, but there's nothing they can do. I mean, if you think about it, if you're on the phone with someone and they're telling you that someone just broke into their home and they saw them before they came in and they've got a gun, and then you hear, oh my God, he's in the home. I'm in a closet, blah, 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 blah. And then the next thing you hear is gunshots. Think about that for a second, how that would resonate inside of your mind, how you would process knowing that this individual has called you for help and you just heard them get shot, So that in itself imposes a lot of stress on our dispatchers. Then on top of that, a lot of the times they don't wind up getting any closure to the call that they dispatched. So in most cases, individuals will call for service, call for help, whatever the case may be. They'll get the information, they'll try to help the best they can, and then they send out these individuals to try to help that individual or people, and they hear everybody clear up on the radio, and that's the end of it. The last thing these dispatchers hear was the phone call that originally come in, and then the radio traffic, and then nothing. They don't know if somebody went to jail. They don't know if somebody died. One of the most taxing things that I've seen is when it comes to children, when there's a child suffering an injury, a medical issue, something along those natures, and these dispatchers were intensely involved in trying to help preserve that child's life, and then they get no outcome. They don't get the closure that the rest of us do when we're on scene. They don't get that. No one calls back in and says, hey, you guys good? This is what happened. This is the result, yada, yada, yada. They don't get that a lot of times. So often enough, these individuals are left with this unfinished movie played out in their head. And that also can wind up causing, mental health issues. And it's a lot of stress on ordinary individuals that are tasked with doing extraordinary things. And it's on a persistent, constant basis. It's our jobs. It's what we do. We get out there and we do this every day that we are supposed to be at work. And even on days we're not supposed to. The vast majority of us, we're out and about in public. If we see something going down, we're going to interact. We're going to get involved and try to help. If we have the capabilities and the ability to do that, that's what we're going to do. It's how we're programmed. So, we're exposed to it so much. And one of the things that doesn't get the attention that it deserves is the mental health aspect, how it affects the individual's mind and how to cope with it and move forward with it and so on and so forth. And in return, if someone's not careful, if the individual is not careful, they wind up developing poor coping mechanisms. And in turn, it just increases the severity of whatever mental health issue they've got going on or the symptoms thereof. So you get all of this stuff crammed into one little tiny spot inside of our domes, and we don't know how to deal with it. And because there's a stigma, not just in society, but even more so within the public safety community on seeking mental health help with dealing with this job, there's still a huge stigma within that community. No one really reaches out. Of course, there's outliers. Of course, there are agencies that have some things in place. I know our local 911 center has a quiet room for our dispatchers. So when calls are too much or too intense, or they got too much built up inside of them because of what they're dealing with, they can excuse themselves after the call and go to the quiet room and kind of mellow out a little bit and kind of get themselves put back together. With my agency, one of the big things that we do is critical incident debriefing. So anytime we deal with some of these really bad scenes, we're offered the critical incident debriefing where we go in and we're able to talk about these things and so on. And I'll get more into that later. Fire departments have their own things. EMS has their own things. But in reality, the vast majority, and in doing research for this particular episode, I have found that the overwhelming statistics all point to there's not the access to help with mental health as there would be with anywhere else, in a sense of, agencies more often than not do not have proper mental health assistance in place or plans in place to truly be able to keep a check on their employees, make sure they're good. It's not just these mass incidents that these individuals wind up experiencing these things that cause it, because it's not just the incidents. It's not just those particular calls that helps cause all of these. It's a portion of, it's a percent of it. There's more to it than just that, because again, we're all individuals. So often enough, mental health winds up pretty much getting ignored. And because of the stigma evolved around it, if someone does go, and it's a huge if, on an individual in the public safety community goes to seek out assistance with their mental health, they don't tell nobody. If they do, it's maybe one or two of the people that they hold the closest, but they don't tell anybody, because the big machismo thing. I'm good, I'm solid. And it's because that stigma prevents them from either going and getting it or even talking about it. Now, those that have been in it for a while, I have seen those individuals. They are willing to talk about it. They'll see the signs in other individuals. I'm like, hey, you mind if we talk? But because of the whole machismo thing of I'm big, strong, nothing phases me, blah, 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 or fear of, losing a job, or fear of your coworkers, seeing you as less and your capabilities of doing and handling the job, it doesn't get talked about. And especially a lot of the old timers, like I consider myself an old timer at this point, with my time in, but even there are people that have got more time in than me. And a lot of these individuals are like, oh, well, we didn't do that when I was on the road. This isn't something that we dealt with. Well, and that's all fine and good, but times are different. We understand more about this job than we did. Back in the 80s and things like that, they weren't really keeping an eye on statistics like they are now. They weren't really looking at the rates of domestic violence and alcoholism and substance abuse and suicide and all of these things that come from poor mental health. They weren't really collecting all of that data back then. It didn't dawn on them. It just wasn't a thing. Men and women in all aspects of the public safety community were just going out and doing the job and dealing with however they dealt. I've had it said to me by coworkers that have been in this 20 plus years, 30 years, that it wasn't uncommon back in the 80s or so, maybe even a little sooner than that after work, they would sit in the parking lot and drink a couple of beers. I don't know about anywhere else, because obviously I'm in the southeast of the country, but down in southeast of the country, that's not something we're going to do. Your employer is not going to be okay with you sitting in the parking lot chugging a few beers before you head out to the house. That's one thing that will get you canned. If it doesn't get you canned, you're definitely going to have some repercussions for it. But back in the 80s and probably early 90s, it was not uncommon to have things like that happen. Now, it's not to say they don't want you, having some camaraderie and decompressing and things like that, but often enough, and you're going to see here in a few minutes, often enough, alcohol is used as a medicinal way of dealing with the stresses from the job. And if you stop and think about it in your own normal everyday life, those of you that aren't in public safety, why do you consume alcohol? Oh, well, I like to relax. I use it to de-stress. I use it to da-da-da-da-da-da. Okay. Well, again, we're humans. So those same things are going to apply to us, but we're in a higher stress environment on a more regular basis. See how quick this can turn into a problem, how quick you can become an addict, how quick you can become dependent on whatever substance you're using, whether it's alcohol, whether it's sleeping meds, regardless, there's all kind of things. There are law enforcement and public safety personnel that are using drugs. They're flying under the radar until they get caught. but they're using drugs. Why are they using drugs? Well, maybe they got addicted to pain medication because of an injury they got on the job. Maybe they're using an illegal substance to help de-stress and cope with the things that they've been going through. They're humans. They're individuals just like the rest of us, or just like everyone else. And they're going to fall victim to the same things. They're going to fall victim regardless if that's what they do on a regular basis. They're going to eventually fall victim to it if they don't keep their mental health in check, if they don't keep away, or if they don't find a way to make sure that they don't slip down that slippery slope and become one of the individuals that they're typically trying to help. Okay. So that's why this one is so important. That's why mental health is so important to me, especially in terms of public safety. In the 17 years that I've done this now, I've seen a lot of things. I've seen coworkers that have committed suicide. I've seen the children of coworkers die. I've seen the way this job can change individuals. And I mean, this job isn't, obviously I'm in the law enforcement side of it, but I work very closely with all of the others. I work very closely with corrections, with the fire department, with EMS, with dispatch. I work very closely with these individuals, especially in my particular area of the world. While our agency, our public safety agency in general, is pretty decent size now, it's still nowhere near as big as some of these places like Atlanta, New York, California, the cities in California. These bigger cities, even Savannah. Ours isn't as big as the one in Savannah, and that's not far from us. So it's still not that big. So we're still very close. I can name people in every aspect of public safety in the area where I work, just because that's, we can still do that with our particular size. So I've seen these things, some of these things I've experienced, and maybe we'll get into that at some point, about some of the things I've experienced. Matter of fact, I know we're going to when we talk about this topic. So it's extremely important to me just because I've seen, witnessed, and experienced it on my own level here in our little corner of the world. So it's important. And because it's important, I think it's important for us to get out there and talk about it. And what's going to happen with this particular topic is it's not just going to be this one episode. It's going to wind up being 2 or 3 episodes. A couple of different reasons for that. One of the main ones is I'm trying to keep these episodes a little shorter, because I know I can get to where I drone on, especially if it's something that I'm excited about. So I want to try to keep the episodes a little bit shorter, kind of keep you guys engaged a little bit longer. That's one of the reasons. But also, it's scheduling and planning and things like that. So this one's probably going to be 2 or 3 episodes long. I know it's at least going to be 2. So I'm hoping you guys will stick with me as we move through this, because it is very important, especially for those of you that listen to the podcast or watch it on one of the platforms. It's important. It's at least important for you to get the information and keep it as food for thought, just in your general life, whether you're in public safety or not, but especially if you are. So that's how this is going to go. Okay. So jumping right into it, what I wanted to do is give you some statistics, because when I started doing the research on this, because I obviously, I speak most times from my personal experience. I'm very, very clear on most of the things that I speak about. It's from my experience. It's how I dealt with things. That's the basis that the podcast was formed around, is how I've dealt with things through my life that have worked or not worked in order to try to help people. So on this particular one, I didn't want to just pull from my own experience, because my experience is just that. I wanted to have a more well-rounded picture for people to understand. So in doing this and doing the research on it, guys, when I tell you there is a plethora of information out there for this, that doesn't even cover it. There is vastly too much information available for mental health, in public safety and law enforcement, all of it. There's so much information that, in the length of time that I'm trying to get these episodes done in, I can't cover it all. Absolutely no way I can cover it all. And it was suggested, well, why don't you break it up into little series? And that's great. But I don't want to be a constant browbeat on you guys on these particular topics, because it's mental health. It's something that people don't really want to talk about. So what I'm going to do with most of this is I'm gonna plant the seed for you guys. Okay, I'm gonna give you some food for thought. I'm gonna plant the seed, and I want it to be something that at least stirs your mind and gets you thinking. Okay, so that's the scope of where we're going with this. So, and all of that information that I was able to find, I wound up condensing a bunch of it down so that it's, something more manageable and something you guys can digest a little better and not feel like I'm just kind of beating you over the head repeatedly for it. All right. So some of these statistics, well, not so quick statistics, we're going to go through those real quick. All right. So since 2017, well, start off by saying 2016, the federal government finally recognized the importance of mental health in the public safety community and put federal regulations out there and started putting money towards collecting data on mental health with public safety, especially that revolving around suicide. So finally in 2016, our federal government went, hey, you know what, maybe this is something we really do need to take serious. Maybe we actually do need to take care of the people that we expect to take care of our citizens. So in 2016, I believe it was 2016, they signed federal regulations into place to disperse funding and things like that for that specific topic. And in 2017, it was reported that 1,236 suicide-related deaths occurred among public safety. Okay. Since 2017. Since 2017, 1,236 people have committed suicide that work in the public safety community. That's pretty big. And I say it's pretty big because of the number of people in this country versus the numbers of us that work in public safety. That's a pretty big number. Okay. The highest suicide count was in 2019 with 250 public safety officers committing suicide. That's what the statistics report. So in 2019, we had 250 public safety personnel kill themselves. That's a lot for people that, are doing a job like we do. 250 in 1 year. Even since 2019, now mind you, they're keeping track of these statistics. Since 2019, we've only dropped, as of 2022, we've only dropped to 193. 2022, we had 193 individuals that worked in public safety commit suicide. So we went from 250 to 193. And yeah, that's a good number. We like seeing the numbers drop. But we still lost as a community, as a public safety community, we still lost 193 of our brothers and sisters to suicide. Now, I didn't look into the statistics on what the leading causes for, or what the leading departments, what area of public safety those 193 come from. And I've not researched into what was going on, whether it was a case-related thing, whether it was a life-related thing, whether it was a substance-related thing. I didn't look into any of that. That's not important to this particular topic right now. But in 2022, we lost 193 of us. So 193 public safety personnel we lost in 22. Amongst all public safety, so everyone in public safety, amongst all that, law enforcement and fire department were drastically higher suicide rates. Drastically. I mean, it wasn't even close. When you look at the statistics on the number of law enforcement, fire department, EMS, corrections, and public safety communication officers, when you look at the number of suicides, fire department and police, law enforcement, drastically outnumber the rest. The easiest way for me to see it was in a bar graph, because you can look at numbers all day and you know the difference, especially those of you that your mind clicks with numbers real good. But the bar graph, like, it was ridiculous. It was two towers standing amongst a small Indian village almost, and looking at the statistics on it. So, that's that's a topic worth looking into all in itself. Why is it so much different for law enforcement and fire department than it is for the rest of the public safety community? And of course, we can all speculate and everything like that, but that's something I don't want to do. I don't want to speculate when it comes to something like this, just because it's important. It's important. Last year, we lost 193 individuals. It's that important. It's life or death important. So I don't want to speculate on that. So we're not going to. But it's worth noting that those are the two areas of public safety that lose the most. 83.3% of all public safety suicide deaths are Caucasians. So over three quarter of all deaths in the public safety community are Caucasian public safety workers. I got none. I can't tell you why. Maybe it's a cultural thing. I don't know. But 83.3% of public safety workers are Caucasian. Those of you that listen or watch the podcast, if you're Caucasian, you're part of that statistic. You too could be a victim of it. So it bears listening. It bears doing some research and some soul searching for yourself. In 2019, a Police One article reported that law enforcement officers will on average experience 188 critical incidents in their career. So I didn't look up, I probably should have, but in the average career of law enforcement, according to this 2019 article, on average, a law enforcement officer will experience 188 critical incidents in their entire career. If you're not in the public safety community, how many critical incidents do you experience? Food for thought on that one. In comparison to the average citizen who's not in public safety, how many critical incidents will they experience? Now, in critical incidents, we're talking about things that truly shock the mind of an individual, whether it's mass casualty, whether it's a vehicle crash with a death, whether it's a homicide, whether it's just a death in general. How many in that same career timeline, how many critical incidents the average citizen is going to go through? I would venture to say that it doesn't even compare. It doesn't even compare. And it's just by the sheer nature of the job. We're called to these things. So when they're happening, we're the ones that are going to be there. So on average, 188 throughout an individual's entire career. A 2022 Psychiatric Times article reported that 30% of first responders will develop a behavioral health condition as opposed to 20% of the general population. So 30% of the public safety community, first responders, 30% will develop a behavioral health condition, whether it's substance abuse, whether it's depression, whether it's anxiety, whether it's PTSD. 30% of those involved will develop a behavioral health condition, as opposed to 20% of the average citizen. So 20% of the average citizen is going to develop that. Hey guys, got to jump in here real quick. I hope you're enjoying the content. However, we have reached the end of this particular part, and we'll pick it back up on the next one. Thanks for joining me. See you on the next one.